Welcome to another OU Insider Under the Visor YouTube Live. My name is Brandon Drumm. I'm here with Parker Thune, our man Spencer Forsythe on the board, and we're here to talk Sooners athletics. So much so that we have noticed that the conversation, for the most part, pre us going live in the chat below, is a lot about OU basketball and Porter Moser. Obviously, the game's going on. Oklahoma's down 23-29 with 6.5 minutes left to go in the first half. But they're on the road against the number 14 team in the country. And yeah, they played bad. You cannot deny how bad this team has played in spurts this year. Obviously, sandwiched in between two pieces of crap is the Alabama win. Obviously, just where they just throttled them, and the number 2 team in the country at the time. And then preceding all that was Oklahoma losing by single digits against ranked teams over and over and over and over, and literally choking games away. And I get it. People are mad at Porter Moser. They think this isn't what OU basketball is about. And it's not. It's not. And there is some truth, Parker, that he needs to start keeping these guys and not let some of the best players head to the portal like they did his first year. And obviously Harkins in year 2, right? And Manic and all that. So I think, there's got to be a happy medium there, right? Like pushing him aside in year 2 in a complete rebuild, the program needed to rebuild it, is probably not the best solution.
True. And I think there are a lot of factors to consider here regarding the whole Porter Moser conversation. And I think one is that this team just has a complete inability to deal with adversity, and that's manifested itself in so many different ways. But they're a really good basketball team until they get punched in the mouth. Yep. And that's why when Alabama came to town, Oklahoma buried them. It's because Alabama never punched him in the mouth. Oklahoma jumped out early, stayed ahead, maintained the momentum. But when they've gone up against teams that will get off the mat and start swinging again, I think the game that always will come to mind will be that game up at Fog Allen Fieldhouse where the Sooners led by 10 with 5 minutes to play and managed to choke that game away in regulation.
Baylor at home.
That Kansas team has championship DNA. They're the defending national champions, right? And they get down in their building and Oklahoma's got some juice, but then what happens? Kansas hits a couple shots, the crowd gets back into the game, and Oklahoma falters. And they continually falter whenever they face adversity. And that may come with 5 minutes to play in a tight road game. Or that may come 3 minutes into a home game against a mediocre opponent, like it did this past Saturday against West Virginia, when one thing led to another and the snowball rolled downhill all afternoon for the Sooners in that contest. So I think writing off Moser is no doubt premature, especially given the hand that he was dealt in the aftermath of Lon Kruger's departure. But man, I think this goes understated. The program really misses Mo Gibson right now because they do not have an outside shooter that is on par with Gibson. And quite honestly, I think they win a lot of those games that they've lost to this point if they have Gibson in the lineup. And it's easy to look at a resounding 27-point loss a couple weeks ago against TCU and say, okay, Mo Gibson isn't winning you that game by virtue of his presence. He's not scoring you the 30 points that you need to vault ahead. And while that may be true, what you also have to consider is that Gibson's impact went beyond what he provided in the scoring column because he was an asset that the opponent had to account for every time Oklahoma was on the offensive side of the court. And so when the Sooners offense came up the floor, Gibson was a guy that naturally, if he wasn't doing the scoring himself, he would open up opportunities elsewhere for other guys because he'd draw the attention of the defense. And I think the Sooners miss the dynamic 3-point presence that he provided to that lineup right now. And I don't foresee things getting any better for Oklahoma. Obviously, there's going to be plenty of buzz about Moser and that Notre Dame job in the weeks and months to come. We'll see what becomes of that, but you can just about stick a fork in the Sooners in year 2 under Moser, and you regroup, you hit the portal, try to add a couple athletic big men, and you see what you can squeeze out of this team and what will perhaps be their last taste of Big 12 action in the 23-24 season.
Yeah. We sit here, watch this game. Oklahoma's down 5 in the first half right now. And again, I'm with you on all that. You can't really put everything on Porter Moser. I got a text just now that just said, look, there's lack of admin, support also has played a part. And obviously athleticism is another main issue. Just lack of athleticism down low, obviously in the paint, is a big problem. I don't think so much on the perimeter. I think down low, where they get beat over and over and over with opponents just getting offensive board after offensive board. And it's got to get you watch Porter Moser's mannerisms there too on the sidelines, and you can just see his frustration building up every time Groves or trying to think Godwin or whoever is down low, they get pushed out and basically boxed out or just out athleted to the ball. I mean, it's constant frustration. And that people want to say, well, then recruit better players. And I feel like, that's part of the problem, right? Yes, you got to recruit better, more athletic players. And they are. If you go look at what Oklahoma's got coming in, they've got 2 of the top 100 players in the country coming in again this year for the 2023 class. So it's not like he's not bringing in length and athleticism and guys that can play multiple positions, because he is. I think where he's failing right now is bringing in that long athletic big man and finding that guy that doesn't have to be. I think he's fallen, and this is my opinion, kind of prisoner to trying to rebuild what he did at Illinois, Chicago, where he basically had a big man that wasn't super athletic, but was a great passer, was a good shooter, was just really skilled down low. But in these P5 conferences, you can't do that. You've got to have athleticism, and you've got to rely on perimeter game. And I think he's seeing that, but you need to have that guy at the rim that is just going to be that staunch defender, that staunch rebounder. Doesn't have to score 15 points a game, but they need to get 10 rebounds a game and have about 2 or 3 blocks a game, and really, really be a person that's going to make everybody adjust what they're doing at the rim. And until they find that guy, because Groves isn't that guy, Godwin's not that guy, they're going to struggle. They are going to struggle against more athletic teams.
No, they will. And I think what compounds upon the issues that the Sooners have right now as a program right now is that they play in the Big 12. And that's a really good basketball league. I was I was talking on the radio airwaves this afternoon with a beat reporter up in the Tulsa market, and he said, look, this is the best Big 12 I've ever seen, ever.
It's good.
And he's been in the game a while. And it's a league that could produce 7-8 tournament teams here in 2023. And so somebody has to take the brunt of somebody has to come out on the losing end of the war of attrition, I guess is the best way of putting it. And it looks like that's going to be Oklahoma, just because they're a little bit more susceptible to getting pushed around than their peer programs than Big 12. So they got some things to figure out. And I think the big question is, how serious is Notre Dame in their potential pursuit of Porter Moser. I don't think that's really going to have the opportunity to heat up for at least another month and a half until we get close to the end of the college basketball season. But
Yeah.
that is going to be preeminent in the minds of Oklahoma basketball fans as we move forward. Now, let's turn our attention to recruiting, because obviously that's what many of our viewers are here to, well, they're here for recruiting information more so than anything else. And I think the big news of the week and some early buzz that I saw in the chat was regarding Colorado and Will Winery, the 5-star defensive lineman out of Lee's Summit North. And we had a question in the VIP chat from Mongo, who said, is the coaching staff swinging for the fences for anyone outside of Stone and Winery? And yeah, look, this staff is swinging for the fences with a lot of guys. Peyton Pierce, Bryant Wesco, obviously Michael Hawkins, Aaron Flowers. We've talked about so many of these guys that the Sooners are going hard after and pressing to be early commits in this cycle. But I think right now, what so many of these fans are wondering and what so many of them are curious about is, okay, you look at what Oklahoma did on the defensive line in the class of 2023. And yeah, you got some talented guys. You got Derek LeBlanc. You got PJ Adebare. You got Taylor Wine, a late riser that a lot of programs came calling for once his senior tape hit Huddle. But you didn't get Caden McDonald. You didn't get Jordan Renaud. You didn't get David Hicks, obviously. And a lot of folks, a lot of morons, Brandon, are taking the example of the 2023 class and holding it up to shoehorn into their agenda and their narrative that Todd Bates is not the recruiter that so many make him out to be. And no doubt a lot of those same morons circa December of 2020 were writing DeMarco Murray's epitaph as a coach and as a recruiter. As it turns out, you need a sample size of more than one recruiting cycle to get an idea of what a guy can or can't do as a recruiter. And obviously, when you look at what Todd Bates accomplished at Clemson, it's pretty clear that what happened in 2023 was a blip and not a trend, especially when you consider that a lot of what happened in a couple of those recruitments in particular were largely out of his control. Now, heading into 2024, the Sooners are very much in play for 4 elite defensive linemen in this cycle. Will Winery, we mentioned, Damian Sims, Nigel Smith, David Stone, the local kid, 5-star out of Del City, Oklahoma, currently at IMG. Winery is the one that I think right now is the least likely of the 4. And that's not to say that OU doesn't end up with a kid. I still think they got more than a puncher's chance. I think they're going to get an official visit from Will Winery. In fact, I would say they're virtually a lock to get an official visit from Will Winery. But a lot of folks worried about Colorado. And understandably so. Deion Sanders and his staff up there have built some early momentum in the 2024 cycle. They've got several early commits. They obviously flipped Cormani McClain to be the crown jewel of their 2023 class at the very end of the cycle. And Winery plans to visit Colorado on April 22nd for the spring game. Now, here's what I can say, having spent time up in Kansas City this past weekend. I don't think Colorado is a top contender for Winery right now. And I think they have a lot of ground to make up. They have a steep hill to climb if they're even going to be regarded as a legitimate contender. Right now, the kid's got really strong relationships at Oklahoma, at Missouri, and at Oregon. Those are kind of the 3 schools right now that have set themselves apart from the rest. And to be honest, I think Missouri and Oregon, and I know it's early, but they're outpacing the Sooners right now. Now, Oklahoma has the chance to make a real strong impression when he comes to town with a couple of his teammates on March 5th. So we'll have to see what becomes of that as this race unfolds. But official visits for the kid are going to happen in the summer. We're going to have a commitment by the time his senior season starts in August, per what I am told, talking to multiple people around that recruitment. So Oklahoma's positioned themselves well. Miguel Chavis has positioned himself well. Obviously, the Sooners have a great degree of familiarity, given that they just signed Caden Green out of Lee's Summit North. Jamar Mosey, the head coach up there, as we've talked about extensively, is a former Sooner, still has great relationships with a lot of folks on the Oklahoma staff, many of whom were there when he played for the team in the early 2000s. So Oklahoma has an intriguing case here for Winery. And I get the sense, Brandon, that there is a radius for that kid, much like there was with PJ Adebawore. And when you really dig into it, there are a lot of parallels between Winery's recruitment and PJ Adeboware's. And much like PJ, who never even really visited any schools that were outside of driving distance in the span of a day from his home in Kansas City, I think Winery has a similar radius in that he's not going to venture too far from home. He's not going to be able to venture too far from home when decision time comes. So he really likes Oregon right now, but Oregon in the end may be too far away for a kid like that. So right now, as odd as it sounds, I think Oklahoma's biggest competition is probably Missouri, and Tennessee's making a strong case as well. Tennessee is probably just off the podium right now at number 4 among the schools that Winery has an interest in. But I think when you examine the situation at Missouri, which was very early to the table to offer in Winery, and consider that there's a good chance that staff isn't there at season's end. I mean, Eli Drinkwitz, there was conversation about firing him after the 2022 season. So if you have turnover on that staff by the end of the 2023 season, all of a sudden, boom, Oklahoma almost by default becomes the ostensible front runner. So again, commitment in the summer is what you can expect. But if that doesn't go Oklahoma's way, I'm not convinced it's entirely over, especially if Missouri does end up being the choice, just because there's a lot of uncertainty right now at Missouri as to what the future looks like if they don't win in 2023.
Yeah, so there's a debate on Todd Bates as a recruiter in our chat right now. And let me name some of the guys that he's landed, Parker, for those that think, oh, he wasn't a good recruiter, he's not a good recruiter. That's the dumbest crap I've heard. I'm sorry, I'm going to be blunt, but it's so stupid. Brian Barisi, the number 1 player in the country. Number 1 player in the country. Todd Bates, primary recruiter. DeMonte Capehart, primary recruiter. I don't know what class he was in. I can't remember. I think it was 2020. He is the number 34 overall player in the country, right outside being a 5-star. Right outside being a 5-star. And if you actually go and look at his recruiting, let's see where he actually is located. He's literally a top 50 overall player, no matter how you slice it. EJ Williams, wide receiver out of Phoenix City, Alabama, because obviously Todd Bates is from Alabama. So that makes it really easy for him to go ahead and, help land a guy. He's a secondary guy on that. He was a primary guy on Peyton Page, top 100 overall player in the country, defensive lineman in the 2021 class. Trey Williams, another defensive tackle, top 100 player in the country. Tyler Davis, a top 150 player in the country. Guess who got him? Todd Bates, primary recruiter. Sergio Allen, inside linebacker, was the secondary guy on that. Ryan Lynchcomb, we all know how good he turned out. Pretty good player, right? He was the secondary guy. Derek LeBlanc, Grayson Haltom, Kevin Swint, Vontae Bentley, Cavante Henry, obviously transferred, Taquan Johnson, Ashton Sanders. So, these are good players. And you're saying he's not a good recruiter. That doesn't make any sense to me. Doesn't make any sense to me. I get it. He got kind of screwed over on the David Hicks deal. Jordan Renaud wanted to get closer to his mom, who lives in Florida, so he goes to Alabama. He was down between OU and Alabama. Makes sense. But at the same time, he landed Derek LeBlanc. You don't get Derek LeBlanc without Todd Bates at all. I mean, what are we talking about? And he came in and landed Grayson Haltom, who was going to Oregon. and he flipped him from Oregon when he got to Oklahoma. So like, and everybody thinks Grayson Haltom is going to be a dude before he leaves Norman. So like when you talk to people inside the program, this is what we talk about. Like, you can't be a prisoner of the moment. You can get upset over stars and all that type of stuff. Totally understandable. But at the end of the day, to sit there and say he's not a good recruiter, did you know that he was one of the main people that helped land Peyton Bowen? Y'all didn't know that. But you're going to sit there and bash the guy. Like, know the facts before you bash. That's all we ask. That's all we ask. He's a good recruiter. He's going up against some tough stuff here. NIL changes everything. You can sit there and say, oh, he's not a good recruiter. He does this, does that. You can't control NIL. If they come in last second and swoop in and a kid's going to be going to OU and OU offers this much and this school says, well, we'll give you this much, and the kid goes and takes the money, that's not the coach's fault. But here's the thing. The fact that they were right there with a lot of those guys, if they end up hitting the portal, who do you think they're going to call? They're going to call Todd Bates. Hey, do you have a spot for me? So as Parker alluded before, and I don't remember, I think it may have been on I don't remember what it was, where it was maybe in last week on the live, literally said finishing second now means more than it ever has. And there's so much truth into that, because that's where, if that player ends up getting in the portal, they're going to call that coach that they have that relationship with, no matter where they're at. Todd Bates could be at Florida or whatever. They're going to call Todd Bates because that's who they trusted outside of where they went. And they want to go somewhere comfortable that's not just using them for money and giving them money to play there. That's going to try to invest them holistically. That's what Venables and all them have been teaching. They're going to invest in the total package, the total human being. And that's going to pay off. You've seen it pay off in the transfer portal with Oklahoma already. Some of these guys come to Oklahoma that, look, Bothroyd, nobody expected Oklahoma to be the pick until it was. I mean, Oklahoma came in there late. He obviously took a visit and all that. But when he first got in the portal, everybody's like, he's going to Notre Dame. He's going to Notre Dame. He's going to follow his quarterback. And Oklahoma, bam, was on it, built a strong relationship with him, and got him to Norman. And why? Because they knew him through playing against him in the ACC, and had talked to him and built a relationship with his coaches in high school and all that type of stuff. It pays off, folks. It pays off. So to sit there and say the guy can't do this or that after 1 year, he's had one true cycle. Let's see what he does in 24 and 25 before you throw him to the wolves. That's all we're asking.
Okay.
You got any more to add to that, Parker?
I got nothing to add, because it's a conversation that shouldn't need to be had, and we shouldn't be having it at this point. Todd Bates has one recruiting class that could be construed as somewhat underwhelming, and all of a sudden we're labeling him a guy that can't recruit the way everybody acts like he can. No, it's asinine, and hopefully the 2024 class will settle some of that. And that leads into the next question from the super chat, which comes from Chris, who says, are 24 recruits waiting to see OU's play on the field in the fall, meaning a long offseason? I think in some cases that'll be true, but I think you have guys that have the potential to be foundational pieces in this class for Oklahoma that do not care what the product looks like this coming fall. Perfect example, Nigel Smith, a guy that Brandon and I have had crystal balls in for Oklahoma. I think it was November that we both predicted Nigel Smith would ultimately land with Oklahoma. And honestly, those crystal balls were a long time coming. OU's led there for almost a year. But I've told this story so many times over. I'm fairly certain it was the week after the loss to Texas. OU just gets hammered from the jump, from opening kickoff to the final gun. They get throttled by the Texas Longhorns. Sans Dylan Gabriel, right? They lose that game 49-0. It's the third straight loss for the program. They're in dire straits. Everyone's alarmed. pissed off, has no idea what's going on and why everything has seemingly collapsed under the direction of a staff that seemed to have so much going for them. And I go down to Melissa and I watch Nigel Smith on a Friday night and end up talking to him for probably 20 or 30 minutes after the game. And at a certain point, I just asked him, man, be straight up with me. Like, Oklahoma's not very good right now. That program is in worse shape over the last 3 weeks, and they're losing games in a manner that they haven't lost them in a long, long, long time. So having watched the Kansas State game, which he was there for, he was on campus for the Kansas State game. Having watched that game and the TCU game and the Texas game, has your perception of the Oklahoma program been shaken or altered at all after those 3 losses? And Nigel said, absolutely not. He said, look, this is the reason why Oklahoma needs people like me, because the right coaches are in place to turn this thing around. They just got to have the dudes. And I'm going to be one of those dudes if I go to Oklahoma. And my class, the class of 2024, we're going to be part of what shakes the snow globe, as it were, and brings defense back to where it historically has been for those great Oklahoma teams of old that have made national championship runs. And so Nigel Smith is a guy that absolutely could not care less, because his mindset is not, what do things look like right now before I get there? His mindset is, just wait till you get to see what things are going to look like when I get there, and me and my dudes in the 2024 cycle get there. So all of that to say, I really like where Oklahoma stands with that kid. And that's just one example of a player that, regardless of what goes on the gridiron this fall, regardless of what went on this past fall en route to that 6 and 7 campaign, there are players specifically on the defensive side of the ball as well, because I know that's probably what folks are more concerned about in the aftermath of the 6 and 7 season. But there are defensive players, and elite defensive players at that do not care how banged up and bruised the reputation is at Oklahoma on the defensive side of the ball, because they believe in Brent Venables. They buy what he's selling. They believe in the assistants. They believe in what this staff has going at the University of Oklahoma, and they're committed to being a part of the change if they do end up picking OU.
Yeah, I mean, that overall, as far as, Nigel Smith and all those guys that, in this 2024 class, they've seen one thing, that's 6 and 7 Oklahoma. So there has to be some belief, or especially considering the fact that most people are committed by June. So you've got to really believe in the future of the University of Oklahoma, or you wait and see what they do during the season if they're one of your top contenders. Those are your 2 choices. And I don't know about you, Parker, but I think majority of them will probably be committed by August, just like they were last year, if you were to guess, right?
I would say so. And yeah. I also think that the Oklahoma staff's mentality when it comes to recruiting is, and this is not without exception, but their mentality is very much, okay, let's press on the guys that we know aren't going to mess around and drag things out and make life difficult for everybody involved, right? Obviously, they were going to be willing to wait on Peyton Bowen and DJ Hicks and guys of that ilk down the stretch in 2023. But the bulk of the class, you're looking at guys like Makari Vickers and Sammy Omasigo and Caden Green and Josiah Wagner that decided early on, look, I want to be at OU. Let's shut this thing down. I don't want to mess around. I don't want to make a spectacle of it. I just want to be part of the OU family and go play for Brent Venables. And I think similarly, it's not going to be exclusively composed of that type of kid when you're talking about what Oklahoma is going to land in the 2024 cycle, but that's going to be the majority. Low maintenance recruitments.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think a guy like David Stone, everybody wants to talk about David Stone and, where Oklahoma stands. And I talked to somebody today that feels that, at the end of the day, they feel like, and I agree, and I've said this already, that no matter where he commits, if it's not Oklahoma, it's really hard for me to see that pen going to paper on National Signing Day not being Oklahoma in the end, regardless. And I felt that way about Peyton Bowen last year. It just was one of those things where everything just fit with, that recruitment in Oklahoma. And the same thing I feel with David Stone. Now, Damian Sims is another guy that I think Oklahoma has to get because he's an in-state guy. He's 2 hours down the road, can get to Norman anytime he wants to get to Norman, and blah, blah, blah. But, everybody says Michigan State, Michigan State, Michigan State. And when I talk to people, they're like, no. Like, he likes Michigan State a lot, but he loves Oklahoma. His mom loves Oklahoma and Todd Bates more than any other recruiter. However, what they're worried about is when he gets up to Oregon, what's his mindset going to be when he leaves that trip? And he's going to be taking one of those visits here in the future. And I think if Oklahoma can get him back on campus shortly after, I think that puts Oklahoma in a bright, bright spot with him. At the end of the day, I think he ends up going to Oklahoma. And so does everybody around him. If you talk to everybody around Damian Sims, they're like, that kid's going to end up in Norman. He loves Oklahoma. That's just how it is. So if they can end up with 2 of the 4, and I'm talking Nigel Smith, Damian Sims, David Stone, Williams, Winery, they can end up 2 of the 4 no matter how it is, of those interior guys, because every one of those guys has a frame where they're probably going to be more interior than they are exterior on the defensive line. I think that's a really good class. You just kind of build around it.
And my mind is changing on Williams and Winery because Miguel Chavis has been his primary recruiter for Oklahoma. And for the longest time, I regarded that kid because I remember seeing him as a sophomore and just thinking, this kid's already massive. There's not a chance that he's not 280, 290 and playing defensive tackle by the time that he ascends to the collegiate level. But man, that kid's development has been so intriguing because he got yoked. Right? He got bulked up very early on. Again, as a sophomore, he's playing at a chiseled 250 pounds, like no bad weight on that frame whatsoever. And that's why I and a lot of folks that cover recruiting we were all kind of looking at his film and doing the in-person evals and thinking, you know what, this kid's going to be a defensive tackle. But then he comes back out for his junior year and he's sitting in the 250, 255 range. Now he's every inch of 6'5", tall kid, and may not be done growing either. But the speed, the dexterity, the twitchiness with which he played, and he played mostly off the edge as a junior. I don't think it's something that mostly anybody saw coming for the most part. I certainly didn't. And I've seen a lot more of, I may have seen more of Williams Winery in person to this point than anybody with any recruiting network. Yeah. But it was, and I remember reading Alan True's eval on Williams and Winery after he ascended to number 1 among defensive linemen in the 2024 class. And you could just tell reading what Alan wrote on Will that he was just astounded by the leaps that the kid made from his sophomore year to his junior year. And we all figured that those leaps were going to come with an increase in strength, an increase in bulk, and he was going to become a dominant force at defensive tackle. Instead, that kid is 255, 260 pounds and as fast and as dominant an edge rusher as you will find in the country. To me, he is this cycle's Keon Keeley. That's who I would liken him to. And from a recruitment standpoint, I've likened him to PJ Adebawore time and time again, because I think there are a lot of parallels as far as the recruiting process is concerned. But in terms of what he is on the football field, Will Nwaneri is Keon Keeley. Because you watch Keon Keeley, that kid's tall, he's muscular, he's wide, but he is fast.
Yeah.
And knows how to use his hands and can beat you a million different ways. And I think Will's still developing his arsenal of pass rush moves. He's not as far advanced as Keeley is or was at that point, but there are a lot of similarities there. And that's why he's already attained 5-star status and is regarded as the number one defensive lineman in the country, according to 24/7 Sports.
Yeah. I haven't seen him live, so I don't particularly know yet. I'll get to see him later on this spring, but it's hard for me when somebody says that he's the number one defensive lineman. It's hard for me just because I've seen David Stone so many times and hearing all the lore that comes from IMG and everything with him in the one-on-ones and never been beat or anything like that. All that stuff that you continue to hear from people. It's just hard for me to imagine somebody better than David Stone, but at the same time, I totally get it. Like you said, I think PJ was, in the same vein at this point as well. Just kind of, it's hard to say underrated when you're the number one defensive lineman in the country, but I think across the board, more people will look at David Stone than they will Williams Nwaneri just because David's out there all the time publicly. So, and obviously Williams isn't, and neither was PJ. We do have a question in Mongo asks, does PJ's little brother like wagons?
Yeah,
sure
so
he
PJ's
does.
younger brother, Yeye, out of Yeye, they just call him Yeye, out of Yeye, out of Barre, is class of 2025 at North Kansas City. And he's a lot shorter than PJ. PJ is kind of the one that got the freak show genetics in the family because his older brother is going to be a day 2 pick in the NFL draft this season. Tommy is his name, out of Tomiwa, out of Barre. And he played at Northwestern. That's why PJ had a ton of interest in Northwestern as a recruit. But even Tommy is only maybe 6'2". He's an interior guy, 280 pounds or so. PJ told me at the All-American game, my older brother will break the combine shuttle record for defensive tackles. Watch. And said it in total sincerity. So I'm eager to see what kind of run Tommy makes at that record. But, PJ, we've talked about his physique and the physical traits that he brings to the table. The 6'4" height, pushing 6'5", the 7'1" wingspan. And Yeye is not that physically. He's about 6'1", probably about 285 right now. Definitely an interior guy, strong as all get out. And so if he ends up being a P5 caliber player, I think it's kind of unclear right now how high his ceiling is and whether he's done growing. But you think about the fact that Tommy went to Northwestern, then PJ kind of blazed his own trail going to Oklahoma. I wonder if Yeye does the same thing. I think if he gets an Oklahoma offer, it's going to be tough to turn down just because that family's tight knit. And that's why it was for the longest time OU and Northwestern in PJ's recruitment. That was a battle that we all were confident OU was going to win it, but Northwestern was in it.
Yeah.
They maintained a strong presence in that recruitment for quite some time. So, yeah, we'll see what happens with Yeye down the line. I know he's a guy that the OU staff is very aware of naturally because anytime you have a kid as athletically gifted as PJ, anybody that has those same genetics, you're going to keep a close eye on.
Right. Well, it was asked, does anybody think Damian Sims is going to be the first guy to commit 20 or he's going to be likely to commit first? And I don't know if they're talking about through the D lineman or of the D lineman or anything like that, but I know the plan is to take a few visits before, official visits before a decision is made. Oklahoma will most likely get an official. They will get an official. And I would assume Oregon, if he goes up there and likes it the way most think he will. And then obviously Michigan State, and then maybe I mean, I don't really know. Maybe in Arkansas or somebody like that, maybe get another one. But I think for the most part, if you know, we call him Day Day. Obviously, if you know Day Day and his family, they're very close knit. He's got brothers and sisters. Just from he just is really close with his mom. So it's hard for me to see him leave a great distance away from his mother. So that's where I like Oklahoma, and that's where the comfortability with Todd Bates has come into play, obviously, throughout this whole deal. So, I mean, we'll get a better sense of that as March, April, and May and June roll through, because I think you'll have a real good sense of where Day Day's mind is at in June. And I think at some point in July or so is where I could see a decision possibly being made. I don't know that as fact, but that's just kind of the time frame I kind of gathered by talking to people around him in the C4 program. There's a lot of people that are wanting to talk about running backs and running back targets. So I guess, Parker, I know we've talked about Peoples, obviously. Trying to think, there's several other guys that are major players for Oklahoma. There's a guy, though, that is committed to the best program right now in the country in Georgia, in Tavani Mizell. And he visited Oklahoma last spring after he committed to Georgia, mind you. And his relationship with DeMarco Murray and the OU staff is pretty deep. And that relationship is manifesting itself into a potential official visit later on this spring. So that's something to watch there. Do you want to break down a few other guys? Now, I don't know that I will add this. Don't get your hopes up on a flip. Like flipping somebody from Georgia is like really,
that's
really
about as
hard
tall
to
a
do.
task as there is in
Yeah.
college football right now.
But if anybody could possibly do it at the running back position, obviously it'd be DeMarco Murray.
Yeah.
So
Well, we haven't talked about Tavani Mizell in quite a while, Brandon. And yet, you're right. The kid's visited Oklahoma multiple times. He was on campus this past fall, too. He's visited Oklahoma multiple times since he committed to Georgia. And, man, when you factor in James Peoples and Taylor Tatum and Kaden Durham and, gosh, who am I leaving out? Jeremy Payne, Xavier Robinson, Stacey Gage. It's like, who doesn't want to play for DeMarco Murray right now? And obviously, you can't take all of those guys. I would say at maximum, OU takes 3, and I think they only take 3 if one of them is Xavier Robinson, because with him being a kid from right up the road, you kind of have to take him. You got to make room for him if he wants to come. So I think OU ends up with 2 or 3 of those 6 or 7 that we cited. That's about all you can realistically hope for based on the numbers. But DeMarco Murray can basically just have his pick of the litter, man. No, it's impossible. It's literally impossible for any Sooner fan to be disappointed with whatever DeMarco Murray comes up with in 2024, because for the 3rd straight year, it's going to be 2 blue chip backs.
Yep.
And maybe a bonus local kid.
Well, and I mean, look, Kaden Durham, he was texting with me earlier this week and was like, look, every time I get back to Norman, it's home. Like, that's home for me. And that's because he obviously grew up in Moore. His family's still located around the Oklahoma City, Moore area. So he's got a tight connection around that region and this area. Loves coming back up to Oklahoma City. Just comfortability, a lot of friends as well. So when you add that, and then obviously Peoples is a player that Oklahoma feels really strongly about. I know everybody wants to ask about Stacey Gage, and it just seems like as time has gone on with the 2024 running back recruitment, there's just been, and this is my opinion, I don't know it, I wouldn't say it's fact, but it's what I've kind of gathered is that there just seems to be players leaping him as far as the pecking order goes as time goes on. Did you get that sense? Have you gotten that sense as well, Parker? With Stacey Gage, people kind of jumping him in the pecking order.
Yeah, and it's, Gage was a guy that his tape really popped as a freshman, and he was ranked really, really high. I think he was a 5-star when the first composite rankings in the class of 2024 came out. And he's kind of gradually slid down, and other guys have leapfrogged him. So, yes, when you're talking about the OU pecking order, but when you're also talking about the national recruiting rankings, there are a lot of guys that have vaulted past Stacey Gage. And I really like James Peoples, man. I think that he and Kaden Durham, if that's the backfield tandem that Oklahoma ends up with, and to me right now, I think that's the most likely outcome.
Yeah.
You are thrilled with
Absolutely.
that because make no mistake, everybody talks about Kaden Durham, and rightfully so, because he rushed for 2,400 yards, something to that extent this past year as a junior for Duncanville. I mean, game breaker every time he steps on the field. James Peoples doesn't generate as much buzz. He's the number 6 running back in the 24/7 Sports Composite.
Mm-hmm.
And you watch his tape from Veterans Memorial down in San Antonio, that kid can go.
Yeah, Jeremy Payne as well, obviously from Hightower, Missouri City Hightower. He's a guy that there's a lot of people that think Oklahoma leads for him, ironically. He's a player that's visited Oklahoma recently. He's a player that he says he wants to take more visits before a decision's made. But if you talk to some people down there in that Houston area, Missouri City, southern part of Houston metro area, there's some buzz that Oklahoma, could be the pick. And I don't know if I would be interested to see, and I know this sounds kind of premature, if Oklahoma try to slow some things down there a little bit, just because you obviously have Peoples, you have Durham, you've got Mizell, you've got a few other guys that maybe you want to get on campus a little bit more and see if you can't get them to pop first. So that running back, like you said, he's going to have DeMarco's going to have his, pick of the litter, whatever he wants type of deal. I think another position that's going to be interesting, and people talk about defensive line, you talk about, running back. I think wide receiver is going to be that position that everybody's going to really focus on right now. And I talked to Bryant Wesco at length this weekend. And, as high as, his sister plays soccer, his mom and dad are track stars. He's running track right now, all that type of stuff. He's got a lot of Oklahoma connections. As much as that may be the case, he still has some visits he wants to take. And I don't see a decision. I mean, everybody thinks, it's close with him. But they don't – when you talk to, Wesco himself, he'll sit there and tell you, look, man, I want to take my time a little bit. He says he has a pretty good idea of how things are going to go, but he wants to go check out Oregon. He wants to go check out a couple other places and then see where the chips fall after that because, he said, I haven't really got to go through the process the way other people have. And that's one of those things that are just it's a once in a lifetime deal. And when you have one of those situations, you want to live through it a little bit. And I think that's his idea. Now, how long does he want to deal with it? He doesn't strike me as a type that's going to love the process all that much. So I could see Oklahoma, being a guy that could, be in a program that could get him to pop pretty soon. And obviously with Emmett Jones being the recruiter, he told me flat out that move was huge for Oklahoma with him because his relationship with Coach Jones was really strong when he was at Tech. And it just was a great combination. The fact that he loved Oklahoma and he got one of his favorite recruiters to go to Oklahoma he said it was the best of both worlds for him. So I think that's one thing that, is good for Oklahoma there. And then obviously everybody wants to talk about Micah Hudson. He's supposed to be coming in early March for a visit. He visited Oklahoma on several occasions. His sister goes to OU. So there's another one of those connections where, it's already there. So, I mean, I don't know. I think Emmett Jones is going to land a really good class. I think Zion Raggins from Georgia is going to be a guy that he visited Oklahoma the previous junior day. He's going to be a guy to watch as this goes on. Will Oklahoma get an official visit? Zion Kearney's another guy that really likes Oklahoma a lot. There's just an assortment of guys, Parker, that, Emmett Jones is on. But since he's so new to the staff, it's going to be interesting to see how all this unfolds as we get into April and May to see who the really big names are that kind of go to the forefront.
Oh man, I think it's hard to gauge right now which receivers Emmett Jones ends up with beyond. I think the most likely among the targets right now that have offers to land with Oklahoma is Bryant Wesco. I think that's kind of the consensus. But outside of that, man, it's hard to say who else comprises the receiver class. I don't think there's any question that Emmett Jones is going to sign some dogs. And he's one of those guys that, because of his influence in the state of Texas, because of his relationships down there from his time as a high school coach in the Lone Star State, he's one of those coaches, he's one of those assistants that's going to be able to tangibly help out with other recruitments outside his position group. You think about the full court press that Oklahoma put on Peyton Bowen at the end of the 2023 cycle. Right? Brandon Hall was obviously his positional coach, but Jay Valai was heavily involved. Todd Bates was heavily involved. Emmett Jones is going to be one of those guys that can venture outside of his purview, as it were, and help out with other guys in the state of Texas at various other positions that Oklahoma is trying to close on. And so this was a phenomenal hire for Oklahoma as far as the wide receivers coach position is concerned. And I am interested to see how immediate the payoff is on the recruiting trail, whether Jones is a guy that can get people believing in what he's going to have the capacity to build in the receiver room at OU right off the bat and maybe lock down 3 or 4 guys by the end of July, or whether he'll still be chasing a couple commitments into the fall because he's got the relationships, but he's just got to prove something in how he develops the receivers that he has already in front of him in his room at Oklahoma.
Yeah. Well, I think that'll probably do it for this version. Oklahoma's down 1 right now, 48-49. I can't remember. The clock went away right as I was saying that, but
shout out Ricardo LeBlanc, Brandon.
Yep. Got to shout out Ricardo LeBlanc. Thank you, Mongo, for that. We definitely will. That's our guy. His son is doing really well right now at Oklahoma. Long frame, really athletic. If he can pick up things on the field when they put the pads on, they think there's a good chance that he will be a major, major rotation guy moving forward. But if you're not a member of this YouTube right now, this YouTube channel, OU Insider 24/7 on 24/7 Sports, subscribe. We are at right now 8.5 thousand. We're trying to get up to 9,000 by spring starting at the end of March. So if you can subscribe. If you're not a member of OU Insider VIP, sign up. $1 for the first month, $9.95 afterwards. It's 30% off right now. $75 gets you a whole year. You get OU Insider, you get all of 24/7 Sports, and you get to every site on 24/7 Sports. If you want to go to Bama, if you want to check out Georgia, A&M, Texas, whatever, Oklahoma State, Arkansas, USC, whoever you want to go check out, you can go check out their site as well and see how they're recruiting, what their admin are saying and their reporters are saying about recruiting. similar targets that Oklahoma has, and you can bottle up that information and know just as much as anybody else to be the guy or girl at your job that knows all about recruiting, all about OU football, and be the person in the know. So $1 for the first month, or if you want to go month to month, then $9.95 afterwards, or it's 30% off right now, $75. Get you a whole year of OU Insider VIP leading up to spring practice, where we're going to have that covered wall to wall. And it's going to be fun. So that's going to do it for this version of the OU Insider Under the Visor YouTube Live. For Parker Thune, for Spencer Forsythe, my name is Brandon Drumm. You guys have a blessed night.